Hope you can hear me okay. I am going to see if I can load up my presentation fairly easily. I sometimes have troubles with this, so let's. It's been a while. Let me just go and share, and hopefully it all works as I hope. Here we go. And now I hope that is working. I'm just going to check on my phone to make sure everything is in order. Seems to be. Okay, so we're looking at two very different Mansurs. You probably can guess that one of the Mansours is Caliph Mansur. The other Mansur is St. John of Damascus. And this has created a little bit of curiosity in me in terms of the use of Mansur in both cases. Now, I seem to have gone to the wrong part of my presentation. Let me try again. Is that working? Yeah. Just bear with me. Okay. We're at the right point now. Sorry about that. Okay, so looking at John Mansour, otherwise known as St. John of Damascus, and Caliph Mansur. And the source for my material today can be found in archive.org. If you look up St. John of Damascus's writings, The Fount of Knowledge, you'll see the introduction, so you can have a read of it yourself. I'm going to be drawn largely from that, and also add in my few sort of thoughts and reflections as well, and bringing in a few other details as well. So, taken from the introduction to St. John's mighty tomb, I would say, or tome, The Fount of Knowledge, which is a theological writing, its introduction says that what we do know with any certainty about the life of St. John of Damascus is very little indeed. From the chronography of Theophanes, we learn that John's father was Sergius, the son of a certain Mansur, an Arabic surname meaning victorious, hence St. John's surname is Mansur. Mansur had evidently been one of the Greek officials of Damascus who were taken into the service of the Caliph Yazid when the city fell to the Arabs in 635. So essentially, St. John's grandfather took on this role of working as part of the administration for the Arabs, and then John's father continued that, and so did John. So it was in the family for 3 generations. So if there was ever a case of someone being on the inside, John was certainly. Sergius was a most Christian man and Lagothith general under the Umayyad Caliph of Damascus, Abd al-Malik. The Lagothith, or comptroller, was probably some sort of treasury official or collector of taxes. All such positions requiring some technical skill were usually held by Christians under the more or less benign rule of the Umayyads. Now, before we continue, just the key points there are there on your right-hand side. So essentially, John's father was Sergius. Mansur means victorious. So this is interesting. This might indicate a reason why a very different person, Caliph Mansur, perhaps took the name Mansur for the simple reason that it meant victorious, but we're going to explore what the other possibilities are later. Now, if we go from there, elsewhere in the introduction, it says, of the life of its author, Yana ibn Mansur ibn Sargon, better known as St. John of Damascus, very little is known. There are a few brief notices to be found in the acts of some church councils and in some of the Byzantine chronicles. But beyond such scattered and very limited information, there is practically no certain source for the life of this man who was the last of the fathers of the church. So the traditional source for the biography of John of Damascus dates to no earlier than the 11th century, so it's quite late. So there's a bit of a gap there. Now, I draw your attention to part of his name, Ibn Sargon. This sounds like Sargon with the O, made famous by Sargon of Akkad, who, of course, lived not just centuries, but a good couple of thousand years before that. The reason why I point that out is that because Sargon was an Akkadian, this might suggest that this name is Assyrian. It's just a suggestion. Now, there's another possibility, and it could be limited to my knowledge of linguistics. Is it connected in some way to Sergius? I don't think so. So obviously, I'm open to correction on that one. Now, the key thing there is John's surname was Mansur. That may be significant as there's a caliph known as Mansur. Are they part of the same family, ethnic group, or tribe? It seems unlikely, but it's interesting nonetheless. Did Caliph Mansur give himself this name in honor of John, who died just before he became caliph? I think that might be a more likely reason, though, considering they are of two very different beliefs, creeds or faiths. I think the reason for that wouldn't necessarily be down to sharing the same faith. It might have another reason, perhaps a political reason, if that was the reason for choosing Mansur as his name. But it's quite remarkable. About the role that John played before he became a priest, the Greek term logothetes, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, means one who accounts or calculates, literally one who sets the word. The exact origin of the title is unclear. It is found in papyri and works of the church fathers, denoting a variety of junior officials, mostly charged with fiscal duties. Now, considering he was a logothetes general, that bring him up a little bit above a junior official, quite an important person. He's in charge of the general financial ministry, so generally involved with taxation and revenue. So very important for the Umayyads. A little bit more now from the introduction. So I'll have to just skip back to the beginning of this, just so that it kind of makes a little bit of sense here. So, however, Theophanes relates that Abd al-Malik's successor, al-Walid, required the Christian public officials to keep their accounts in Arabic rather than in Greek, except for such of the more complicated as exceeded the potentialities of the Arabic language. So, in terms of large numbers, it was more difficult to do that with Arabic at the time for reasons I'm not entirely clear. But it's interesting how late it was that the regime kind of moved towards Arabic, really at the turn of the 8th century. You'd expect that they would have made that change earlier, considering that the standard Islamic narrative would have you believe that the Quran was in place decades before, and surely they would have moved to Arabic much quicker if that was the case. But it just seems Arabic was only beginning to become central at the turn of the 8th century. I digress. This same caliph took several other measures against the Christians, such as taking away their permission to share the Basilica of St. John the Baptist with the Muslims. There's a strong tradition that John succeeded his father in office, and this would seem to be supported by the acts of the Second Council of Nicaea, which compare him to St. Matthew the Publican, saying that he considered the following of Christ to be of far more value than the treasures of a rabbi. So it goes on to say, if the exposition and declaration of faith which has come down to us in an Arabic translation under the name of John of Damascus is authentic, then we have certain precious hints about his life which impugn the accuracy of the account given by the life, which is the account of his faith journey. Thus, in the profession of faith, obviously made upon the occasion of his ordination to the priesthood, he says about himself, Thou hast nourished me with spiritual milk, with the milk of thy sacred words. Thou hast sustained me with the solid food of the body of our Lord Jesus Christ, thy only begotten and most holy Son, and hast intoxicated me with the sacred life-giving chalice, which is his blood that he shed for the salvation of the world. Because, O Lord, thou hast loved us and given thy beloved only begotten Son for our redemption, which he willingly undertook and without shrinking. So truly, O Christ God, didst thou humble thyself to bear upon thy shoulders the strange sheep that was I, and feed me in a verdant place, and nourish me with the waters of right doctrine by the hands of thy shepherds, who once by thyself fed, did forthwith feed thy chosen and noble flock. And now, O Lord, by the hands of thy pontiff, thou hast called me to minister to thy children. I think you'd agree, there's no question of St. John's orthodoxy. He's one of the shining lights of Christianity. There's no question of him in any way having even a hint of heresy about him. So that's kind of important in his own words to point that out. Okay. Now he refers to thy pontiff. So who is the pontiff? It's not necessarily the Pope, as some people might think at first glance. Although Damascus was certainly one of the most verdant places in all Syria and Palestine, it is obvious enough that this verdant place is of another kind, without any doubt the monastery of Saint Sabas. The shepherds might well be the Bishop of Jerusalem and the priest of the monastery, but they are more probably the inspired fathers teaching through their writings. We may conclude that while St. John received at Damascus the normal religious training which any child of a devout Christian family would normally get, thou hast nourished me with the milk of thy sacred words, it was at Sabbath that he acquired his profound knowledge of the writings of the fathers. The pontiff referred to can only be John V of Jerusalem, who reigned from 706 to 735, whom John refers to in his letter on the thrice holy hymn as one who in theology was in absolute agreement with the Holy Fathers, and of whom he himself was a devoted disciple. In this, as in most professions of faith made upon the occasion of priestly ordination or episcopal consecration, there is the enumeration of the heresies to be anathematized. The iconoclastic heresy, however, is not mentioned at all, which is practically conclusive evidence of the fact that the ordination took place before the publication of Emperor Leo's first edict against the holy images in 726. Furthermore, there is nothing in the whole profession of faith which could be construed as a reference to his receiving instruction from some monk before entrance to the monastery. If there had been a monk, Cosmos, such as the life describes, the "Thou hast nourished me with the milk of thy sacred words" would be a very inadequate expression from such a writer as the Damascene. Well, I think he's referring to God the Father there myself, but in any case, had there been such a person, the Damascene would have made more explicit mention of him. So we continue elsewhere, and this is kind of sums up a little bit of what we've seen so far. Hello to, let me see, Ingo, Century Sense, and Gent said, welcome. So this is kind of just to summarize what we've seen so far, really. From the foregoing, we may conclude that John Mansur, known to us as St. John of Damascus, was the son of Sergius, Christian tax collector for the Umayyad Caliph of Damascus, Abd al-Malik, and grandson of an important Christian official who had been given the surname of Mansur. He probably succeeded his father in office at a fairly early age and served under Abd al-Malik and his successor al-Walid. Al-Walid was not so lenient with his Christian subjects as his predecessors had been, and in particular he imposed restrictions upon the Christian treasury officials. The harsh policy of al-Walid towards the Christians may well have been the determining factor in John's decision to embrace the monastic life. If that was the case, we're lucky in retrospect, because without that we wouldn't have the amazing works of St. John, who I think was one of the greats of the Church Fathers. There he devoted himself, that's at the monastery of St. Sabas, to the practice of asceticism and the study of the fathers, becoming a protege of John V, by whom he was called to the priesthood and ordained sometime before the year 726. Now, in 726, Leo the Isaurian's first edict against the holy images was published. So Leo, in case you're not clear, is Emperor Leo. For whatever reason, he decided to go against the tradition of the use of icons. So that was in 726. The enforcement of this edict led to the resignation of the then Patriarch of Constantinople, St. Germanus, in 729. It was of that time that Theophanes relates. At that time, John Chrysohoas, apologies if I'm mispronouncing it, flourished at Damascus in Syria, a priest and monk and a teacher most noble in both life and speech, and John, together with the bishops of the East, anatomized the impious Leo. This was in 730. Now that kind of gives you an indication of how well thought of John was, that he took the role of speaking on behalf of all the other bishops. And it was about this time that the three apologies were composed against the iconoclasts in general and Leo in particular. Okay, so it's interesting here, as we'll see later, that Leo in particular was singled out in this apology against the iconoclasts. From the tone of these discourses and from what Theophanes says, it would seem that John was acting as the mouthpiece not only for John of Jerusalem, but for all the bishops of the East beyond the territories of the Greek emperor. In them, he spoke very plainly against secular interference in matters ecclesiastical. If an angel, he says in the second apology, if a king preach a gospel to you other than that which you have received, close your ears, for I still hesitate to say, as did the apostle, let him be anathema, as long as I see any possibility of recipients. It does not belong to kings to legislate for the church. To kings belongs the maintenance of civil order, but the administration of the church belongs to the shepherds and teachers. So he's basically very clear in terms of the sphere of control. The civil authorities are meant to look after the civil area. The church authorities are meant to look after the ecclesiastical affairs. So these apologetic discourses furnish such a complete defense of the veneration of sacred images based upon scripture, tradition, and reason that in subsequent ages and down to the present day, there has been no need to add to it. It is no wonder that John incurred the enmity and hatred of the iconoclast emperors Leo the Isaurian and his son and successor Constantine V, who reigned from 741 to 775, so the latter end of St. John's life. Theophanes tells how Constantine Chronimus called him, instead of Mansur, Mansur, which in Hebrew means bastard, pardon the language here, and how he ordered him to be anathemized once a year. So obviously, Leo's son didn't take too kindly to his father being anathemized by St. John of Damascus, so he basically returns the favor and not only does it once, but takes it upon himself to do it once a year. The iconoclastic council held in 753 in the palace of the Hiera near Constantinople, in anathemizing the three great opponents of the iconoclasts, Germanus of Constantinople, George of Cyprus, and John of Damascus, concludes thus: anathema to Mansur, the man of evil name and Saracen sentiments; anathema to Mansur, the worshipper of images and writer of falsehood; anathema to Mansur, the insulter of Christ and traitor to the empire. Before I read any more, notice that John of Damascus is being referred to by his surname Mansur 3 times there. and this is in 753. Why is this important? Because the following year, the second Abbasid Caliph took charge, and what did he call himself? He decided to call himself Mansur. Is that a coincidence, or is there a connection? He could have picked any name he wanted, but he chose Mansur. Um, it's my instinct, impression, my gut feeling, and I've no evidence for this, so you can take it for what it's worth. Is the Caliph took on that name as an FU to the Byzantine authorities. He may not have agreed with St. John's beliefs, but if the Byzantines hated him, that was reason enough to embrace that name. That's the way I would take it. So I think that to me makes sense now. As I say, I can't prove that. It's just in terms of the timing, it just seems too much of a coincidence that the Caliph the following year took on the name Mansur. So this council, who is probably acting very much at the under the instruction of Constantine, also says the Trinity has brought them all three. Sorry, I'll say that again. The Trinity has brought them down all three, referring to the three apologists behind the that were against the iconoclasts. Okay. Now, where I've lost my train of thought there. John was by then already dead, but the impression which he made upon the iconoclast was still very strong. The author of The Life, which is the story of St. John, and others have praised him for his courage in opposing the iconoclastic emperors of Byzantium. Others have indicated that John was quite safely beyond the reach of the Byzantine emperors and that it took no courage to oppose them. Okay, so nevertheless, it might be pointed out that, we'll come to that in that line in just a second. So key things I want to point out as of now. John died in 749, and then the council happened in 753, which is 4 years later, and he's accused of having an evil name. And like, imagine a council says you have an evil name, Mansur. The Caliph the following year says, "I'll take that name, thank you very much." Having Saracen sentiments. Now that makes me wonder, why would they say he's got Saracen sentiments? Is there any truth in that? Well, here's the thing. There's no question that St. John of Damascus is thoroughly orthodox as a Christian. So if they're saying he has Saracen sentiments, and if there's any truth to that, then that would indicate that the Saracens were very much in line with his Christian sentiments. So that's the problem. I think it's probably, though, it's more likely to be calumny. It's not a true charge against him. I'm sure Mansur or John was, proud of his heritage and so forth as a Christian. Perhaps the fact that he worked for the administration for decades probably was enough to warrant being called sympathetic to the Saracens. I like Nicodemus' comment there in the chat. Better late than Muslim. Okay, yeah, exactly. He's also accused of worshipping images, writing falsehood. None of this is obviously true. Insulting Christ, again, that's without any warrant. Okay, so real kind of for a council to say that against a saint is quite incredible. There we go. And also being a traitor to the empire. Now, clearly, John is working to uphold the rights and privileges of the church, even if that means going against the emperor. The emperor doesn't have legislation powers or legislative powers within the church. Certainly not the power to change the faith as well. Okay, so a little bit further then. Nevertheless, it might be pointed out that the Damascene was living among Mohammedans who themselves execrated every sort of picture or representation of any living creature, that furthermore he wrote just as strongly against the Mohammedans as he did against the iconoclasts. Now, this is according to this introduction to the book. I would have a problem with this because we know that the Umayyads had no problem having pictures and representations of living creatures in their palaces, as we've shown in earlier videos. Maybe that might be something I might um, uh, upload on this current channel if it's not there, just to remind ourselves of that. So to continue, we also know that Caliph al-Walid II ordered the tongue of Peter, Metropolitan of Damascus, to be cut out because of his preaching against the Muslims and the Manichaeans. Right, now that's interesting, isn't it? That al-Walid, it's one thing to say he had a problem with Peter's preaching against Muslims, but to have a problem with his preaching against the Manichaeans, that might indicate that that early belief system had a certain commonality with the Manichaeans. That's interesting. So it says, of which offense the Damascene, which is John, was equally guilty. There's no doubt but that John of Damascus would have expressed himself just as forcibly against the enemies of the holy images had he been living within the confines of the Greek Empire. Theophanes refers to the Damascene as our Holy Father John, who has well been called Chrysohoas because of the golden grace of the Spirit that is reflected in his speech. Chrysohoras, or golden flowing, was the name of the river which irrigated, maybe irritated as well, but which irrigated the gardens of Damascus. That this epithet was most fittingly applied to St. John has been well borne out by his extant writings, particularly his sermons. Now, it's interesting that this name given to St. John in reference to a river, we find that Caliph Mansur also had a name that's connected to a river, which is peculiar. So this is like a double coincidence, which was Abu Jafar. Now, a Jafar in Arabic means like a little stream. So isn't it interesting that there's a second parallel between the two Mansurs? Okay, I'm not suggesting that these are the same people or anything like that, not at all, but just that it's like as if the Caliph is attempting to, let me see, take some of the shine from St. John, or at least share in the glory of St. John in some way. So we continue, that this epithet was most fitly applied to St. John has been well borne out by his extant writings, particularly his sermons. The best example of his eloquence is to be found in the 3 homilies on the Dormition of Our Lady. And I think we don't need to read the rest of that. It's there if you'd like to read, but it just basically goes into how well he explains various theologies to do with Our Lady and so forth. So you can have a read that at your leisure. So we're just going to continue on to Constantine V. Do you remember Leo's son? Now, if you remember at the council, they referred to John Mansur as Mansur, like bastard. Well, it's interesting that the Byzantine historians returned the favor to Constantine V. I have here, this is from a Wikipedia entry, and I presume it's reliable, but it says, his fervent support of iconoclasm and opposition to monasticism led to his vilification by later Byzantine historians and writers, who denigrated him with the nicknames the dung-named, Copronymus, or Copronymus, maybe is how you pronounce it, because he allegedly defecated during his baptism. Similarly, anointed with urine is another name that they gave him, and so on. Okay, so, and then there's even Capalinos, referencing the excrement of horses. So, they laid it on thick against him as well. All right. Now, but we're leading now to the question of Mansur and why he got the name Mansur. Now, this is very likely to be part of the standard Islamic narrative, but we share it nonetheless, just to leave no stone unturned. So, one explanation for his name is that his first wife was Arwa, known as Musa, whose lineage went back to the kings of Himyar, which is, as you know, down in Yemen. Her father was Mansur al-Himyari. She had a brother named Yazid. Could this be why he took the name Mansur? For him to name himself after his father-in-law, if that was the reason for his regnal name, would suggest she belonged to a powerful Himyar family. It could indicate, considering the power of Jews in the Himyar region, that there's a Jewish connection, possibly. But I don't know if I'm fully buying the explanation. Um, it's possible, but I don't know. I'm instinctively suspicious of anything that smacks of the standard Islamic narrative. It's certainly an explanation, but I'm not sure. Now, according to Al-Suyuti's History of the Caliphs, Al-Mansur lived from 714 to 775 AD. Okay. He was born in Humaima, modern-day Jordan. Al-Mansur was a brother of Al-Safa. This was the first of the Abbasid caliphs. Both were named Abdul Allah, or servant of Allah, or slave of Allah. And to distinguish between them, Al-Safa was referred to by his kunya Abu al-Abbas. All right. After the death of the Umayyad Caliph Hisham ibn Abdul Malik in 743, a period of instability followed. Al-Safa led the Abbasid revolution in 747, and his claim to power was supported throughout Iraq by Muslims. He became the first caliph of the Abbasid Caliphate in 750 after defeating his rivals. Now, it's an interesting time for condemning people even condemning people after their deaths. Like if you think about the council in 753 is condemning St. John of Damascus for his writings against the iconoclasts. But also these first two Abbasids were involved in something similar, because what did they do when they took power? Well, according to the story, for what it's worth, they dug up the bodies of earlier caliphs, the Umayyad caliphs, and crucified them, publicly crucified them. That was their part of their way of basically cursing those that went before them. No doubt they also got rid of so many of the sources that existed up to that point. They cleared the decks, as were they destroyed the books and so forth. That's why we have such a a lack of sources for that period, because the Abbasids basically wiped the board clear and started with a new ideology, a new story, and so forth. And this is what we find in the Chinese sources. Okay. So finally, Caliph Mansur began his reign in 754. This came 1 year after the Iconoclastic Council condemned another Mansur by name for having Saracen sentiments, among other things. So the question is, why did he call himself Mansur? So did he take his kunya because his father-in-law was called Mansur? Or because the name was appropriate because it meant victorious? Or out of support towards a Christian saint of that name, i.e. St. John of Damascus, St. John Mansur? Did he take it out of that? Or to oppose the Byzantine emperor? If the Byzantine emperor hated Mansur and called it an evil name, and condemned him multiple times at a council, I think it would be the ultimate act of rebellion to actually fully embrace that name and actually call yourself Mansur. It's kind of like an FU to the Byzantines. They probably thought to themselves, we're not prepared to be a vassal state of the Byzantines. We're going to do it our own way. And if the Byzantines say black, they're going to say white. That's kind of part of the way they do things. So that's my thoughts on that. I'm just going to unshare now. I'll come back to you. So that's it for today. I don't know if any of you have any comments. Perhaps you could leave your thoughts on what you think the best explanation for why Caliph Mansur took that name. Do you think it was because of his father-in-law? Do you think it's because of the meaning of the name, that it means victorious, and that that's a legitimate reason? Do you think it's because Saint John of Damascus was condemned by the Byzantines, so he took up that name? What are your thoughts? So if you leave your comments below, and that is it from me. I will end it here. So thank you for dropping by. See you all.